Peter Pan's Fun Adventures for Kids. Peter Pan, with his mischievous smile and adventurous spirit, flies gracefully through the starry sky of London. The twinkling of the stars reflects in his eyes as he approaches the windows of houses, looking for new friends to take him on an extraordinary journey. At the window of a cozy room, Wendy, Hansel, and Gretel look up at the sky in wonder. They have no idea that they are about to meet Peter Pan, the boy who never grows up, and embark on an adventure that will change their lives forever. Peter Pan, with the help of magic fairy dust, teaches Wendy, Hansel, and Gretel how to fly. The children, enchanted, experience the unique sensation of floating through the air, leaving behind the worries of the real world and diving into a universe of dreams and fantasies. Flying together through the night sky, the children follow Peter Pan on a dazzling journey. The lights of London fade away as they head to Neverland, a place where magic is real and each day brings new discoveries and exciting adventures. Neverland is a magical place, full of vibrant colors and enchanting creatures. Fairies fly happily among the trees, while mermaids play in the crystal-clear waters. The setting is a true paradise for children's imaginations, where every corner holds a new adventure to be discovered. Peter Pan introduces Tinker Bell to the children. The little fairy shines brightly, scattering fairy dust wherever she goes. With magic tricks and mischief, she enchants everyone. Tinker Bell is a loyal friend and is always ready to help, although she can be a little jealous at times. Children venture into the enchanted forest, where they encounter giant trees and talking animals. Each step reveals a new mystery, from hidden caves to secret clearings. The forest is a place where anything can happen. Suddenly, the Lost Boys appear, a group of mischievous youngsters who live in Neverland. They are led by Peter Pan and are always ready to have fun. The children are excited to meet new friends who share their adventurous spirit. Peter Pan introduces the Lost Boys to Wendy, Hansel, and Michael. They quickly become friends, sharing stories and laughter. Together, they form a tight-knit team, ready to face any challenge Neverland can throw at them. Friendship is the bond that holds their adventures together. Captain Hook and his pirates gathered on the deck of the ship, whispering about an evil plan. With sly looks and sinister laughs, they wanted to capture Peter Pan and his friends. With ancient maps and promises of treasure, the crew was determined to finally defeat their flying enemy. Captain Hook's pirate ship was impressive, with black sails and gold details. From the top of the mast, the flag with the skull and crossbones waved in the wind. On the deck, cannons gleamed in the sun, ready for battle. The ship sailed imposingly through the waters of Neverland. Meanwhile, in the enchanted forest, the Lost Boys were having fun playing pranks and having fun. Running through the trees and laughing loudly, they found joy in every corner. Peter Pan, always the leader, encouraged their adventures, ensuring that the fun never ended in Neverland. Tinker Bell, the little fairy, watched the interactions between Peter Pan and Wendy with a jealous glint in her eyes. She didn't like sharing Peter's attention. With little magic tricks, she tried to get his attention, making everyone laugh at her antics. Peter Pan took Wendy to visit the mermaids at Mermaid Lagoon, a magical and serene place. The mermaids, with their sparkling tails, swam gracefully, enchanting Wendy with their melodious songs. Peter and Wendy chatted with them, enchanted by the beauty and mystery of this fascinating place. Captain Hook and his faithful sidekick Smee managed to capture little Tinker Bell in a cunning ambush. Tinker Bell, with her sparkling wings and magical glow, is taken to the pirate ship, where Hook plans to use her to discover the hiding place of the Lost Boys. Trapped on the dark ship, Tinker Bell is desperate, but does not lose her courage. Captain Hook, with his Machiavellian smile, pressures Tinker Bell to reveal the secret. Reluctantly, and under threat, she ends up revealing the location of the hiding place, fearing for the lives of her friends. Meanwhile, Peter Pan discovers what has happened and quickly rallies the children to come up with a rescue plan. Determined to save Tinker Bell, they devise an ingenious strategy to infiltrate the pirate ship. Peter leads the charge, confident in his ability to meet any challenge. Upon arriving on the ship, a battle unfolds. Peter Pan and his friends face the pirates with courage and cunning. In the midst of the confusion, Peter and Captain Hook find themselves face to face, beginning a duel full of acrobatics and twists on the ship's plank. With the help of the Lost Boys, Peter manages to free Tinker Bell. Together, they use the magic of fairy dust to fight off the pirates. Hook and his crew, frightened, end up falling overboard. The victory is celebrated with joy, as Peter and his friends return triumphantly to Neverland. Peter Pan and his friends team up to free Tinker Bell, who has been captured by the evil Captain Hook. With intelligence and courage, they devise an ingenious plan. The children, full of determination, follow Peter Pan on an exciting mission, facing challenges and obstacles to save the beloved fairy. After a battle full of surprises, Peter Pan finally manages to free Tinker Bell. The little fairy, with her magical glow, helps turn the tide against the pirates. Together, the children and Tinker Bell celebrate their victory, leaving behind the villains who flee in fear and fall into the sea. The Lost Boys, overjoyed, throw a huge party to celebrate their victory. With lively dancing and games around the campfire, they have the time of their lives. Music fills the air as laughter echoes through the enchanted forest, creating a magical and unforgettable moment. In the midst of the celebration, Wendy begins to feel deeply homesick. Despite all the fun in Neverland, her heart yearns for the comfort of home. She shares her feelings with Peter Pan, who understands and promises to help her return to London with her brothers. With a mixture of joy and sadness, Peter Pan takes Wendy, Hansel, and Gretel back to London. Flying through the starry sky, they relive magical moments. When they reach the bedroom window, an emotional farewell takes place. Wendy, with tears in her eyes, promises to never forget Neverland and her friends. Peter Pan, noticing the longing in Wendy's eyes, decides to take her and her siblings back to London. With a loving smile, he guides them through the night sky, leaving a trail of glittering fairy dust. The stars seem to dance as the children fly back home. When they reach the bedroom window, Wendy, Hansel, and Gretel look at Peter Pan with gratitude. Their farewell is emotional, with tight hugs and promises of reunion. Wendy, with tears in her eyes, assures Peter that she will never forget the adventures they had in Neverland. Peter Pan, with a confident wave, flies off into the starry sky. The children watch as he flies away, feeling a mixture of sadness and joy. Deep in their hearts, they know that the memories and magic of Neverland will always be there. As Peter Pan disappears into the distance, Wendy lies on her bed, still feeling the pixie dust on her skin. She closes her eyes, dreaming of mermaids, fairies, and lost boys. The promise of never forgetting Neverland comforts her, like an invisible hug. The last vision is of Peter Pan waving cheerfully from the sky, promising new adventures. The stars shine brighter, as if bidding goodnight. With a smile, Wendy falls asleep, dreaming of the day when she will fly again with her eternal friend. Subscribe to the channel and like the video so you don't miss any stories. With just one click, they can ensure that Peter Pan and his friends are part of their nights of sleep, bringing new adventures every week, always in the company of their favorite heroes. If you liked it, subscribe to the channel.
Little Red Riding Hood was excited to visit her grandmother who lived in the house on the other side of the forest. With her bright red dress and basket full of goodies, she headed down the flowery path. Little Red Riding Hood's mother had warned her not to stray from the trail and not to talk to strangers. However, as she walked happily, she was unaware that the big bad wolf was watching her from a distance. The wolf, with his cunning eyes, planned a trick to get what he wanted. Little Red sang and danced without knowing the danger that was approaching. The forest seemed peaceful, but the wolf was about to disturb that peace. The big bad wolf approached Little Red Riding Hood with a cunning smile on his face. He greeted her in a friendly manner, complimenting her beautiful dress and basket full of goodies. Little Red Riding Hood, enchanted by the conversation, responded with joy and confidence. The wolf began to ask questions about where she was going, and Little Red, without suspecting it, told him about visiting her grandmother. The wolf, thinking of a plan to get there before her, made a sly suggestion about a shorter and more pleasant route. Little Riding Hood, believing the wolf's words, decided to follow the suggested path. As Little Red Riding Hood followed the shortest route suggested by the wolf, he ran along the path straight to his grandmother's house. Once there, he knocked on the door and, with a soft voice, pretended to be Little Red Riding Hood. The grandmother, without suspecting it, opened the door and the wolf locked her in the closet. Disguised in his grandmother's dress and hood, the wolf lay down on the bed, waiting for Little Riding Hood to arrive. The wolf was eager to complete his evil plan, but he didn't count on the girl's cunning. Little Red Riding Hood finally arrived at her grandmother's house, following the shortest route suggested by the wolf. Upon entering, she noticed that something seemed strange. The house was silent and dark, and Little Red called for her grandmother but got no answer. With a bit of hesitation, she approached the room. When he entered, he saw the figure on the bed and was surprised by the grandmother's appearance. The wolf's eyes, which looked strangely large and bright, and the ears were also unusual. Little Red, feeling a strange sensation, began to realize that something was wrong. Little Red Riding Hood approached the bed and began to question Grandmother about the strange features she noticed. "Grandma, why are your eyes so big?" she asked. "To see you better," replied the wolf in a sly tone. "Grandma, why are your ears so big?" Little Red continued. "To hear you better," replied the wolf. "And why is your mouth so big?" asked Red Riding Hood, now very suspicious. The wolf, impatient and revealing his true character, replied, "It is to devour you." With a leap, he got out of bed, revealing his true identity. Little Red Riding Hood screamed and tried to run out of the room, but the wolf chased her. The girl was desperate, running around the house and trying to find a way to escape. She remembered her mother's words and the importance of not talking to strangers. As she fled, she found the closet where her grandmother was locked and quickly freed her. The relieved grandmother helped Little Red look for a way to escape the wolf. Together, they came up with a plan to get rid of the wolf and protect the house. Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother managed to escape from the house and ran to the main road to ask for help. They met a hunter who was passing by, and upon telling him what had happened, he immediately went to his grandmother's house to confront the wolf. The hunter, with his skill and courage, found the wolf trying to escape and managed to capture it. With the help of the hunter, the grandmother's house was saved and the wolf was taken far away, out of the forest. With the wolf away, Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother could breathe a sigh of relief. They hugged each other, thanking the hunter for his help. The house was safe again, and Little Red promised that she would never stray from the path or talk to strangers again. The hunter smiled and said goodbye, going on his way. Little Red and her grandmother decided to prepare a big meal to celebrate their victory and their safety, and joy returned to the house. That night, while Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother were together, they talked about what they learned from the experience. Little Red promised to be more careful in the future and always follow her mother's advice. They felt grateful for the hunter's help and the fact that they were safe. The two went to sleep peacefully, knowing that the forest was at peace again and that they were protected from danger. The experience taught them to value safety and the importance of being alert. The next day, Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother were happier than ever. They decided to take a walk through the forest, but this time Little Red was always attentive and following her mother's instructions. The grandmother praised her for her prudence and for having learned her lesson. They had a lot of fun together, and Little Red felt proud of having overcome the challenge with the help of her grandmother and the hunter. The moral of the story was clear. It is always important to listen to the advice of your elders and be careful with strangers. Moral of the story: always listen to your parents' advice and be careful around strangers, as prudence and attention can help you avoid danger. If you liked our story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video. Until next time.
Cinderella lived with her cruel stepmother and her two evil stepsisters. Since her father's death, her stepmother took care of everything and forced Cinderella to do all the household chores, while her sisters lived in luxury without helping at all. Despite her hard work, Cinderella always maintained her kindness and never complained about her fate. Every day she dreamed of a different life where she could be free and happy, but it seemed like her life was destined to always be the same. cleaning, cooking, and obeying. One day, a messenger from the palace arrived at the house, announcing that the king would throw a ball so that the prince could meet his future wife. Every single young woman in the kingdom was invited, and Cinderella's sisters were excited. They began planning their outfits and bragging about how they would catch the prince's attention. Cinderella, hearing the news, was filled with hope and asked her stepmother if she could also go to the ball. The stepmother, with a sly smile, said that if Cinderella finished all her chores and found something appropriate to wear, she could go. On the day of the ball, Cinderella tried her best to finish all her tasks. She cleaned the house, prepared meals, and helped her sisters get ready. When she was finally finished, she went to the attic where she found an old dress that belonged to her mother. She patched it up and tried to make it look nice for the occasion. As she walked down the stairs ready to go to the ball, her sisters and stepmother saw her and, jealous, tore her dress, saying that a servant like her had no right to go to a royal ball. Devastated, Cinderella ran into the garden and began to cry. She felt like all her dreams had been destroyed. It was then that, amidst her tears, a soft light began to shine before her. It was the fairy godmother, who appeared with a kind smile, ready to help her. The fairy godmother said that Cinderella deserved to go to the ball, and with her magic wand began to perform her magic. Cinderella, still in disbelief, watched as everything around her began to transform. With a simple movement of the wand, the fairy godmother transformed Cinderella's old outfit into a magnificent gala dress full of sparkling details. Then she transformed a pumpkin into a golden carriage and the house mice into strong and elegant horses. To top it off, she gave Cinderella a pair of glass slippers, which sparkled with each step. Cinderella was radiant and couldn't believe her transformation. The fairy godmother warned her to return before midnight, as the magic would break exactly at that time. Cinderella arrived at the ball in her enchanted carriage, and when she entered the ballroom, all eyes turned to her. Her beauty and elegance were unparalleled. The prince, who until then had been bored with the other young women, was immediately enchanted by Cinderella. He went straight up to her and asked her to dance. Cinderella, shy, accepted, and the two danced around the ballroom as if they were the only ones present. Cinderella's sisters, who were there, did not recognize her and were impressed by the mysterious young woman who won over the prince. Cinderella and the prince spent the night dancing and talking. It seemed like time had stopped for them. However, while Cinderella was lost in happiness, the clock began to strike 12 strokes of midnight. Remembering Fairy Godmother's warning, Cinderella panicked. She broke free of the prince's arms and ran towards the exit, without even saying goodbye. The prince, confused and surprised, tried to follow her, but Cinderella was faster. Running down the palace steps, Cinderella accidentally left one of her delicate glass slippers behind. She didn't have time to go back for it, as the magic was fading quickly. Once she reached the carriage, she barely managed to get in before everything returned to normal. The carriage became a pumpkin, the horses turned back into mice, and her beautiful dress turned back into her old clothes. Cinderella managed to return home without being seen, but the prince kept the glass slipper, determined to find its owner. In the following days, the prince began searching throughout the kingdom for the owner of the glass slipper. He announced that whoever could wear the shoe would be his wife. Many young women tried, including Cinderella's sisters, but none of them succeeded. When the prince arrived at Cinderella's house, the sisters tried their best to put on the slipper, but it didn't fit any of them. The desperate stepmother tried to stop Cinderella from performing, but the prince insisted that all the young women in the house try on the shoe. Finally, Cinderella introduced herself to the prince, and when she put on the slipper, it fit perfectly. The sisters and stepmother were shocked to realize that the mysterious young woman at the ball was in fact Cinderella. The enchanted prince asked Cinderella to marry him, and she accepted with a smile. They were married in a grand celebration, and Cinderella finally found the happiness she so deserved. The sisters, sorry for their evil deeds, asked for forgiveness, and Cinderella, with her infinite kindness, forgave them. Moral of the story: Cinderella's kindness and perseverance show that, even in the most difficult situations, good can triumph. No matter how much others try to bring you down, your heart and actions will guide you to what is right. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel and like the video for more amazing stories like this. Geppetto was an old carpenter who lived alone, but always dreamed of having a son. One day he carved a wooden doll with such care that he named it Pinocchio. When he finished the sculpture, Geppetto made a wish to heaven for the doll to become a real boy. That night, the blue fairy heard the wish and brought Pinocchio to life, who woke up moving and talking like a real child. Geppetto was amazed and moved, embracing Pinocchio with tears of joy. The blue fairy left an important warning. Pinocchio could become a real boy, but he needed to learn to be brave, honest, and generous. Jiminy Cricket was designated as Pinocchio's conscience, to guide him and remind him of his responsibilities. Wanting to have a better life, Pinocchio left home to go to school. On the way, he met Juan Honesto and Gedeon, who told him about a magical place called Ilha dos Prazeres, where everything was fun and there were no rules. They convinced Pinocchio that school was boring and unnecessary, and that he should accompany them to Stromboli's puppet theater. Although Jiminy Cricket tried to warn him, Pinocchio, enchanted by the idea of fame and fun, decided to follow Juan Honesto and Gedeon. He got carried away by the promise of a more exciting life and ignored the advice. Arriving at Stromboli's theater, Pinocchio was received with great enthusiasm. Stromboli was fascinated by a wooden doll that spoke and moved like a real child. He quickly placed Pinocchio on stage, where he performed to an enchanted audience. Pinocchio's success on stage made him feel important and happy, but the euphoria was brief. When he asked to go home, Stromboli revealed that he was more interested in exploiting Pinocchio's profit potential than in his happiness. He locked Pinocchio in a cage, planning to use him to make money from his performances. The blue fairy returned to help Pinocchio, who was crying and regretting his bad choices. When asked why he hadn't followed the advice and gone to school, Pinocchio began lying to cover up his mistakes. Every lie he told made his nose grow even bigger. The blue fairy patiently explained that lying would only cause problems and that honesty was the only way to achieve her goals. Pinocchio, embarrassed, confessed the truth about his actions. The blue fairy, with a gesture of compassion, freed him from the cage and warned him about the importance of being truthful and responsible. After being freed, Pinocchio made a new promise to be a good boy and decided to return home. However, when faced with a new temptation, he found a group of boys heading to Pleasure Island, a place where rules didn't exist. They were excited by the idea of unlimited fun and convinced Pinocchio to join them. Even though Jiminy Cricket tried to warn him, Pinocchio gave in to temptation and went with them. On Pleasure Island, Pinocchio indulged in irresponsible fun, not realizing that he was ignoring his responsibilities and commitments. On Pleasure Island, Pinocchio discovered that children who misbehaved were being turned into donkeys. He noticed that he was starting to transform too, with donkey ears and a tail. Scared and desperate, Pinocchio tried to flee the island, but the transformation was becoming irreversible for many of the boys. With Jiminy Cricket's help, Pinocchio managed to escape the island before it was too late. He was regretful and distressed at having ignored advice and responsibilities, and realized he needed to correct his mistakes immediately. After escaping from Pleasure Island, Pinocchio learned that Geppetto had gone in search of him and was trapped in the belly of a large whale. Determined to save his father, Pinocchio dived into the sea and found the whale. Inside the whale's stomach, Pinocchio found Geppetto, who was weak and tired. They got together and, with a brave plan, lit a fire inside the whale to force it to sneeze and release everyone from its stomach. The plan worked, and the whale expelled Pinocchio and Geppetto back into the sea. Pinocchio and Geppetto, after being expelled from the whale, faced a long swim to shore. Exhausted, they finally reached the beach and were greeted with enormous relief and happiness. Pinocchio promised himself that he would never disobey his responsibilities again and would dedicate himself to being a good boy. They returned home, where they were greeted with warm hugs and joy. Pinocchio had learned the importance of responsibility and honesty, and his journey was not in vain. Back at home, Pinocchio began to behave like a real boy. He dedicated himself to helping Geppetto with all his tasks and returned to school with determination. His transformation into a real boy was marked by acts of kindness and responsibility. He helped his neighbors, studied hard, and became an example to everyone around him. The Blue Fairy returned to congratulate him and confirmed that due to his efforts and good conduct, he had become a real boy. Pinocchio's story ended with a happy ending. He and Geppetto lived happily and fulfilled, with Pinocchio now being a true boy who had learned the lessons of honesty and responsibility. His life was full of love, respect, and true friendships. He became a shining example of how being true to yourself and others can bring happiness and fulfillment. The moral of the story is that being honest and responsible is the key to a full and satisfying life. If you like the story of Pinocchio, subscribe to the channel and like the video for more exciting stories and incredible adventures. The moral of Pinocchio's story is that honesty, responsibility, and courage are essential to becoming a true and happy person. It is important to learn from your mistakes and strive to be better every day. If you like the story of Pinocchio, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video for more exciting stories and incredible adventures.
Once upon a time, in a small village far away, there was a young couple who deeply wanted to have a child. After many years of trying, the wife finally became pregnant, filling their hearts with joy. However, during her pregnancy, the wife began to have an uncontrollable desire for a plant called Rapunzel, which grew in a mysterious garden belonging to a powerful witch. Everyone knew that the garden was a forbidden place, surrounded by high walls, and that the witch did not forgive anyone who tried to steal her precious plants. The wife's desire became so strong that she began to fall ill, and her husband, fearing for her life, decided to risk everything. One night, with his heart racing and his hands shaking, he climbed the high garden wall and picked some Rapunzel leaves. But just as he was about to return home, the witch suddenly appeared, her sinister figure emerging from the shadows. With a piercing gaze, she confronted the man, who immediately fell to his knees, begging for mercy. He explained that his wife was very sick and that he just wanted to help her. The witch, although furious, proposed a deal. He could take the plants, but in exchange, when the baby was born, she would keep it. The man, devastated by the proposal, accepted the witch's deal. He returned home with the Rapunzel leaves and prepared soup for his wife. She improved quickly, but the weight of the agreement hung over the couple. When the child was born, a beautiful girl with hair as golden as the sun, the witch came to fulfill her part of the bargain. Without any mercy, she snatched the baby from her mother's arms, who screamed in despair and disappeared into the darkness of the night. The witch took the girl into her own home and raised her as her daughter, naming her Rapunzel. As Rapunzel grew, her beauty and kindness blossomed, and her golden hair grew long and shiny, something the witch watched with a mixture of pride and fear. She knew that soon other people would also notice Rapunzel's incomparable beauty, and this could pose a danger. To protect her from the outside world and ensure that no one would ever take her, the witch locked Rapunzel in a high tower in the middle of a dense forest. The tower had no doors or stairs, just a small window at the top, through which the witch climbed using Rapunzel's long golden braids. Rapunzel grew up in the tower, isolated from the world, without knowing anyone other than the witch. Every day, the witch visited her, calling, "Rapunzel! Rapunzel! Throw down your braids!" And Rapunzel, obediently, threw her long golden braids out the window so that the witch could climb up. As the years passed, Rapunzel became a young woman who was beautiful and full of life, but also lonely. She spent her days singing and dreaming about what existed beyond the small tower window. Her hair, now immensely long, was a wonder in itself, shining in the sun like threads of gold. Even though the witch told her that the outside world was dangerous and that the tower was the only safe place, Rapunzel couldn't help but imagine what life outside would be like. She dreamed of forests, cities, people, and adventures, but she never dared to disobey her mother. However, she didn't know that her life was about to change forever. An unexpected destiny was approaching the tower, and it would bring with it the promise of freedom and love. One day, as Rapunzel sang one of her sad melodies, her sweet voice echoed through the forest and caught the attention of a prince who was passing by. The prince was enchanted by the voice and followed the sound to the tower. When he arrived, he was intrigued to see that the tower had no doors or stairs. He stayed hidden among the trees and watched as the witch called Rapunzel and climbed up her long braids. The prince, curious, decided to try his luck. The next day, he returned to the tower and, imitating the witch, called, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, throw down your braids." To his surprise, Rapunzel threw out her braids, believing she was the witch. The prince climbed the tower, and when he reached the top, he met Rapunzel for the first time. Rapunzel, surprised and scared, had never seen another human being other than the witch. She backed away, but the prince quickly calmed her, explaining that he had been attracted by her charming voice and that he had no intention of harming her. Over time, Rapunzel and the prince began to get to know each other better. He came to visit her every day, climbing the tower when the witch was away. Rapunzel was fascinated by the prince's stories about the outside world, the cities, the castles, the people, and the wonders she could only imagine. She, in turn, told the prince about her life in the tower, her loneliness, and her dreams of freedom. The prince, increasingly enchanted by Rapunzel, realized that he was in love with her, and Rapunzel also began to have feelings for the prince. They spent hours talking and dreaming of a future together. The prince finally suggested that Rapunzel run away with him. She agreed, but knew they would need a plan. So they decided that the prince would bring pieces of silk each time he visited, so that Rapunzel could weave a ladder and escape the tower. However, they knew that they would have to be very cautious, so as not to arouse the witch's distrust. The secret meetings between Rapunzel and the prince continued for months. With each visit, the prince brought more pieces of silk, and Rapunzel's ladder was almost ready. They were increasingly looking forward to the day they could finally run away together. But one day, during a conversation with the witch, Rapunzel unintentionally blurted out something that would condemn her. She innocently mentioned that her braid was heavier than usual. The witch immediately became suspicious and began to watch Rapunzel more closely. That night, when the prince arrived and called for Rapunzel, the witch saw him for the first time and was furious. Unbeknownst to him, she climbed up the braids first, and when the prince reached the top, he was met by the witch, who cursed him with her poisonous words. When the prince reached the top of the tower, he expected to see Rapunzel's sweet face, but instead he was greeted by the dark sight of the witch, with her piercing eyes and an expression of pure rage. "Did you think you could fool me, foolish prince?" she said, her voice thick with malice. The prince, surprised and alarmed, tried to explain himself, but the witch was overcome with a fury that he could not control. In a fit of rage, she cursed the prince, saying that he would never see Rapunzel again or find his way back to the tower. Then, with a sharp gesture, she cut off Rapunzel's long golden braids, which fell to the floor like strands of shining gold. The prince, desperate, tried to escape, but the witch pushed him through the tower window. He fell toward the ground, his clothes flapping in the air as he plummeted. When he finally touched the ground, he survived the fall, but his eyes were struck by thorns from the surrounding forest, blinding him instantly. In pain and despair, the prince wandered aimlessly through the forest, without vision, without Rapunzel, and without hope. While the prince wandered blind and desolate through the forest, Rapunzel faced her own dark fate. The witch, determined to completely isolate Rapunzel, took her to a distant, desolate region where there were no signs of life. There, she left Rapunzel to live in total isolation, far from any living soul. Rapunzel wept bitterly over the loss of the prince and her freedom. The days became long and lonely, and Rapunzel, even separated from her tower, felt more trapped than ever. But despite her sadness, she never stopped singing. Her melodious voice echoed across the desert, attracting curious birds and other animals, who gathered around her in search of solace. Over time, Rapunzel learned to live alone, cultivating her inner strength and hope. She took care of the animals that approached her and continued to dream that one day somehow she and the prince would be reunited. Years passed, and the prince continued to wander the forest, living in total darkness. He depended on his instinct to survive, eating fruits and roots and drinking water from streams he found along the way. In all these years, he never stopped thinking about Rapunzel. Her sweet voice still echoed in his memory, guiding him in his desperate search. One day, as he walked unsteadily and tiredly, he heard a distant melody. It was a familiar song, which he recognized immediately. Rapunzel's voice. The prince's heart leapt with hope, and he followed the sound, even without seeing, with new determination. His feet tripped over roots and rocks, but he didn't give up. The closer he got, the clearer the sound became, until finally, after years of separation and suffering, he arrived at the place where Rapunzel lived. Rapunzel, upon seeing him in such a state, rushed to him, her tears falling over her blind eyes. In an unexpected miracle, Rapunzel's tears cured her blindness, and the prince was able to see again. Now that the prince had regained his sight and found Rapunzel, they decided never to be apart again. The prince took Rapunzel back to his kingdom, where she was received with great joy and curiosity. Although she had lived so many years in isolation, Rapunzel quickly adapted to life in the castle. The king and queen, the prince's parents, were enchanted by Rapunzel and soon loved her as their own daughter. The kindness and courage she demonstrated during her long time of suffering caused the people of the kingdom to admire her deeply. The prince and Rapunzel were married in a grand ceremony, celebrated throughout the kingdom. The story of their love, overcoming all difficulties, became a legend told for generations. Together, Rapunzel and the prince ruled with justice and compassion and lived happily ever after, safe in the knowledge that true love can overcome any obstacle. Rapunzel teaches us that even in the most difficult situations, hope and true love can guide us to freedom and happiness. No matter how great the adversities seem, with courage and determination, we can overcome any obstacle. Always remember to be strong and never give up on your dreams, even when everything seems impossible. If you like this story, don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible adventures like this.
Un sendero soleado en el bosque, con rayos de sol penetrando a través de las hojas. Los tres patitos y Beger caminan felices. Block está delante, con un bastón como un bastón de senderismo. Plick está en el medio, con un pequeño ramo de hojas de colores en sus alas. Black salta a un pequeño charco de agua, creando salpicaduras brillantes. Beger señala algunas plantas con su pata. Al fondo se pueden ver huellas de conejos en el suelo y algunos arbustos con zanahorias silvestres. Mariposas y abejas revolotean alrededor del grupo, añadiendo color al grupo. Finalmente, después de lo que pareció una eternidad a sus pequeñas piernas, vieron una colina con varias entradas a madrigueras. Oreja saltó de alegría al reconocer su hogar. Guió a los patitos hasta su guarida, donde su familia lo esperaba preocupada. La madre de Beger, aliviada de ver a su bebé, agradeció efusivamente a los patitos por traerlo de regreso sano y salvo. Como recompensa, les ofreció una deliciosa comida a base de ensalada de zanahoria y fresas silvestres. Mientras comían, Beger les contó a sus padres todas las aventuras que vivió con sus nuevos amigos. La familia de los conejos quedó impresionada por el coraje y la amabilidad de los patitos. Después de la comida, llegó el momento de que los patitos se fueran. Se despidieron de Beger y su familia, prometiendo volver a visitarlos algún día. A la mañana siguiente, antes de que cante el gallo, los tres patitos se escapan del granero. Block abrió el camino, con su pequeña mochila llena de pan para el desayuno. Plick trajo un mapa que él mismo dibujó, lleno de lugares imaginarios que quería visitar. Black llevaba su manta favorita por si sentía frío o añoranza. Caminaron por la orilla del arroyo sintiéndose muy valientes e independientes. Los árboles parecían más grandes y aterradores fuera de la granja, y los sonidos del bosque eran nuevos e intrigantes. Mientras caminaban, Plick contaba historias fantásticas sobre dragones y tesoros escondidos, haciendo que Black se escondiera detrás de Block ante cada ruido extraño. Después de unas horas de caminata, decidieron hacer un descanso para comer el pan que habían traído. Mientras comían su desayuno improvisado, los patitos escucharon un ruido extraño proveniente de los arbustos cercanos. Block, valiente como siempre, fue a investigar. Para su sorpresa, era solo un conejito asustado. El conejo, que se presentó como Oreja Grande, estaba perdido y no encontraba el camino de regreso a su madriguera. Los patitos, sintiéndose como verdaderos aventureros, se ofrecieron a ayudar a Oreja a llegar a casa. Plick consultó su mapa imaginario, fingiendo saber exactamente dónde estaba la madriguera del conejo. Black, feliz de tener un nuevo amigo, compartió un trozo de su pan con Oreja. Juntos, los 4 nuevos amigos continuaron su viaje, ahora con un propósito: ayudar a Beggar a encontrar su hogar. La búsqueda de la casa de Beggar llevó al grupo a partes del bosque que los patitos nunca habían visto antes. Enormes árboles se alzaban sobre ellos, con sus copas tan altas que apenas se podía ver el cielo. Plick intentó utilizar su mapa para guiarlos, pero pronto quedó claro que no tenía idea de dónde estaban. Block, reacio a admitir que estaban perdidos, continuó liderando con confianza. Black empezó a cansarse y a asustarse un poco, aferrándose a su manta para consolarse. Beggars, a su vez, olfateó el aire, tratando de reconocer algún olor familiar. De repente, escucharon el sonido de agua corriendo. Emocionados por la posibilidad de encontrar un lugar para descansar, siguieron el sonido. Siguiendo el sonido del agua, los amigos llegaron a una hermosa cascada. El agua cristalina caía sobre rocas lisas, formando una piscina natural perfecta para nadar. Los patitos quedaron encantados. Sin pensarlo 2 veces, Block se lanzó al agua, seguido de cerca por Plick. Black, más cauteloso, probó el agua con una pata antes de entrar lentamente. Big Ear, a quien no le gustaba mucho el agua, se quedó en la orilla viendo divertirse a sus nuevos amigos. Mientras nadaban y jugaban, los patitos casi olvidaron que estaban perdidos. Se salpicaron con agua, se deslizaron sobre las suaves rocas e incluso intentaron enseñarle a Beggar a nadar, sin mucho éxito. Por un momento, todas las preocupaciones desaparecieron, reemplazadas por la pura alegría de una tarde de diversión en el agua. Después de divertirse en la cascada, los amigos notaron que el sol comenzaba a ponerse. El bosque se volvió más oscuro y los sonidos de la noche comenzaron a aparecer. Black empezó a temblar, no solo de frío, sino también de miedo. Block, tratando de mantener la calma, sugirió que construyeran un refugio para pasar la noche. Plick, siempre lleno de ideas, empezó a juntar ramas y hojas. Orejudo, queriendo ayudar, trajo unas hojas suaves para cubrir el suelo. Juntos construyeron una pequeña cabaña con ramas y hojas. No era mucho, pero los protegería durante la noche. Mientras trabajaban, Block intentaba animar a todos contando chistes sobre patos, haciendo reír incluso al tímido Black. Cuando oscureció, se acurrucaron en su refugio improvisado y Black compartió su manta con todos. En medio de la noche, un fuerte ruido despertó a los amigos. Fue el sonido de una ramita rompiéndose, seguido de un gruñido bajo. Block, intentando ser valiente, salió a investigar, con Plick justo detrás de él. Black y Beggar permanecieron temblando dentro del refugio. Para sorpresa de todos, el ruido provenía de un joven oso que se había enredado en unos arbustos espinosos. El osito de peluche estaba asustado y dolorido. A pesar del miedo inicial, los patitos decidieron ayudar. Plock y Plick comenzaron a quitarle las espinas con cuidado, mientras Plack, venciendo su miedo, salía del refugio para consolar al osito con su manta. Big Ear ayudó trayendo algunas hojas suaves para calmar el dolor. Trabajando juntos lograron liberar al osito de peluche, quien se mostró muy agradecido. Cuando salió el sol, los amigos se despidieron del agradecido osito de peluche y continuaron su viaje. El osito de peluche, antes de irse, señaló en una dirección, indicando donde había visto una madriguera de conejo unos días antes. Con esta nueva información, el grupo continuó su camino con renovadas esperanzas. El bosque parecía menos aterrador a la luz del día e incluso comenzaron a apreciar la belleza que los rodeaba. Plick recogió hojas interesantes, Plack jugó a saltar en los charcos y Oreja les enseñó los nombres de diferentes plantas. Plock dirigió el grupo con confianza renovada. Después de unas horas de caminata, comenzaron a ver señales familiares para Big Ear. Los arbustos de zanahorias silvestres y las huellas de conejos en el suelo indicaban que estaban en el camino correcto. Finalmente, después de lo que a sus patitas les pareció una eternidad, vieron una colina con varias entradas a madrigueras. Oreja saltó de alegría al reconocer su hogar. Guió a los patitos hasta su guarida, donde su familia lo esperaba preocupada. La madre de Big Ear, aliviada de ver a su bebé, agradeció efusivamente a los patitos por traerlo de regreso sano y salvo. Como recompensa, les ofreció una deliciosa comida a base de ensalada de zanahoria y fresas silvestres. Mientras comían, Big Ear les contó a sus padres todas las aventuras que vivió con sus nuevos amigos. La familia de los conejos quedó impresionada por el coraje y la amabilidad de los patitos. Después de la comida, llegó el momento de que los patitos se fueran. Se despidieron de Big Ear y su familia, prometiendo volver a visitarlos algún día. Con el corazón lleno de alegría por haber ayudado a Oreja, pero también extrañando su hogar, los tres patitos iniciaron su viaje de regreso a la granja. Esta vez, la madre de Big Ear les dio instrucciones claras y un pequeño mapa dibujado en una hoja de papel. El camino de regreso me pareció mucho más corto y menos aterrador. Recordaron todas las aventuras que vivieron, la cascada, el osito de peluche, la cabaña que construyeron. Cada experiencia los había hecho más fuertes y más unidos. Cuando finalmente vieron la familiar cerca de la granja, sus corazones se llenaron de emoción. Corrieron tan rápido como sus pequeñas piernas podían llevarlos. Cuando llegaron, encontraron a sus padres patos a la orilla del lago, preocupados y buscándolos. El reencuentro estuvo lleno de abrazos, lágrimas de alegría y muchos como de alivio. Los patitos contaron todas sus aventuras, dejando impresionados a sus padres por su valentía y amabilidad. Moraleja de la historia, queridos niños, la historia de los tres patitos nos enseña muchas lecciones valiosas. Primero, aprendimos sobre la importancia de la amistad y el trabajo en equipo. Plock, Plick y Plack enfrentaron desafíos juntos y ayudaron a nuevos amigos en el camino. También vimos cómo el coraje y la bondad pueden superar el miedo y las dificultades. Los patitos fueron valientes al salir de casa y amables al ayudar a Oreja y al osito de peluche. Además, la historia nos muestra que a veces es importante salir de nuestra zona de confort para crecer y aprender. Los patitos descubrieron que eran capaces de mucho más de lo que imaginaban. En última instancia, aprendemos que no importa cuán emocionante sea la aventura, siempre hay un lugar especial en nuestros corazones para nuestro hogar y nuestra familia. Recuerden, niños, sean valientes como Plock, curiosos como Plick y amables como Plack. Cada uno de ustedes tiene cualidades especiales que, cuando se usan juntas, pueden hacer del mundo un lugar mejor. Y ahora, si te gustó esta increíble aventura de los tres patitos, no olvides suscribirte a nuestro canal para más historias emocionantes como esta. Deja un gran me gusta en el video para demostrar que quieres más aventuras de Plock, Plick y Plack. Quién sabe, la próxima vez quizás incluso visiten tu lugar de residencia. Comparte con tus amigos y familiares para difundir la alegría y las lecciones que aprendimos hoy. Hasta la próxima historia, pequeños aventureros.
Snow White was a princess of rare beauty, with her skin as white as snow, hair as black as ebony and lips as red as blood. Her stepmother, the queen, couldn't stand the idea that there was anyone more beautiful than her. Every day, the queen consulted her magic mirror, asking who was the most beautiful in the kingdom. And for a long time, the mirror responded that it was her. But one day the mirror declared, "Queen, you are beautiful, but Snow White is even more beautiful." Overcome by jealousy and fury, the queen decided that Snow White should disappear. She summoned a huntsman she trusted and ordered him to take Snow White to the forest and kill her. The hunter hesitated, but did not dare disobey the queen. Snow White, innocent, followed the huntsman without suspecting what was about to happen. When they reached a secluded part of the forest, the hunter finally couldn't take it anymore. With tears in his eyes, he explained to Snow White the queen's terrible plan and how he had been sent to kill her. Snow White was horrified and begged for her life. The hunter, unable to follow the order, decided to let her live. He asked her to flee as far away as possible and never return to the castle. Desperate, Snow White ran without looking back, her heart beating fast as she lost herself in the vastness of the forest. The hunter, to deceive the queen, killed a wild boar and took the animal's heart as proof that he had accomplished his mission. Meanwhile, Snow White wandered aimlessly, scared and alone, looking for a safe place. After wandering through the forest for hours, Snow White finally found a small house in the trees. Exhausted and hungry, she knocked on the door, but no one answered. Very carefully, she pushed the door and entered. Everything in the house was small, from the chairs to the beds. Curious, she found a table set with food and, unable to resist her hunger, decided to help herself. After eating, Snow White felt so tired that she went upstairs and found 7 little beds lined up. Without thinking twice, she lay down on the biggest one and fell into a deep sleep. Meanwhile, the real owners of the house, 7 dwarves who worked in a mine in the mountains, were on their way home, singing and talking happily, not knowing that they would find a surprise upon arrival. When the 7 dwarfs arrived home, they were immediately surprised to see that someone had eaten their food and gone through their things. They went up the stairs slowly, cautiously, and found Snow White sleeping in one of her beds. At first they were alarmed and suspicious, but they were soon enchanted by the beauty of the young woman and the gentleness of her countenance. When Snow White woke up, she was frightened to see the 7 little men around her, but they calmed her and asked who she was and what she was doing there. She told her sad story and how the queen had tried to kill her. The dwarves took pity and decided to take her into their home, as long as she took care of the place while they were working. Snow White, relieved to have found a safe place, gladly accepted. While Snow White found peace in the dwarf's house, the queen, in the castle, asked her magic mirror again who was the fairest of them all. To their shock and fury, the mirror revealed that Snow White was still alive and that she was now in the house of the 7 dwarfs. Furious at being tricked, the queen decided that if she wanted to ensure Snow White didn't survive, she would have to do the job herself. Using her skills in black magic, the queen created a poisoned apple, irresistible in appearance but deadly to the touch. She disguised herself as an old fruit seller and, carrying a basket with the poisoned apple on top, set out to find Snow White. Her anger and envy motivated her, and she was determined to eliminate the young woman once and for all. Disguised as an old lady, the queen arrived at the dwarves' house while they were away working in the mines. Snow White was home alone, taking care of the household chores, as she had promised the dwarfs. When the queen knocked on the door, Snow White, being kind and generous, opened it without suspecting anything. The queen, with her sweet and deceptive voice, offered Snow White an apple from her basket. "It's the most delicious apple you'll ever taste," she said, with a fake smile. Snow White, without realizing the danger, accepted the apple and, upon taking the first bite, immediately fell to the ground, unconscious. The queen laughed victoriously before fleeing, certain that she had finally rid herself of her rival. When the dwarfs returned home that night, they found Snow White lying on the floor, with no signs of life. Desperate, they tried everything to wake her up, but nothing seemed to work. They realized that something terrible had happened. In their minds, it was clear that the queen had discovered Snow White's whereabouts and attacked her. Heartbroken, the dwarfs decided to place Snow White's body in a glass coffin, so that her beauty would be preserved forever. They placed the coffin on a hill, where they could always watch over her and keep her memory alive. Meanwhile, a prince passing through the forest heard about the young woman of incomparable beauty who slept in a glass coffin, watched over by 7 dwarves. Intrigued, he decided to visit the place. Upon arriving, he was immediately enchanted by Snow White's beauty and felt a deep sadness to see her in that condition. Moved by a strong emotion, he asked the dwarves for permission to approach the coffin and kiss the young woman goodbye. The dwarves, moved by the prince's sincere love, allowed him to approach. When the prince kissed Snow White, something magical happened. The poisoned apple fell from her throat, and she began to breathe again. The dwarfs, the prince and Snow White were amazed at the miracle. Snow White opened her eyes and, upon seeing the prince, felt an immediate connection with him. The dwarves were jubilant, celebrating the return of their dear friend. Snow White was grateful to the prince for saving her, and the two quickly fell in love. She invited him to return to the castle with her, where he could see the kingdom and together they could confront the queen. With the support of the dwarves and the prince, Snow White was ready to reclaim her rightful place on the throne and put an end to the queen's cruel reign. Determined and brave, she set off back to the castle with the prince by her side, while the dwarves waved, wishing her good luck and happy to have been part of her story. Upon arriving at the castle, Snow White and the prince confronted the queen. The queen, upon seeing that Snow White was alive and at the prince's side, became desperate and tried to use her magic to escape. However, the power of true love between Snow White and the prince was stronger than any magic. The queen was defeated, and her magic was broken. Snow White finally took the throne, and the kingdom returned to living in peace and happiness. The prince and Snow White were married in a grand ceremony, and the dwarfs were the guests of honor. Snow White's kindness and courage triumphed over the queen's wickedness, and the kingdom lived happily ever after. Image prompt: Snow White sits on a golden throne, dressed in a royal robe, while the prince stands by her side. In the background, the 7 dwarfs smile and applaud, celebrating their friend's victory. The queen, defeated, is being taken away by the guards. The scene conveys a feeling of joy, victory, and peace. Moral of the story: the story of Snow White teaches us many valuable lessons. Firstly, kindness and purity of heart are the greatest strengths a person can have. Even when Snow White faced the queen's envy and malice, she never lost her kindness and trust in good. This shows us that regardless of difficulties and challenges, we must always maintain our kindness and believe that good will triumph in the end. Another important lesson is that true love is capable of overcoming any barrier. The prince, recognizing Snow White's inner and outer beauty, acted with courage and love, and that was what brought her salvation. Sincere love is a powerful force that can heal, transform and defeat evil, even in the darkest moments. The story also reminds us that envy and excessive pride can lead to downfall. The queen, because she was dominated by her jealousy, lost everything she had and, in the end, was defeated by her own evil. This teaches us to value what we have and celebrate the achievements of others, rather than allowing jealousy to control us. So, children, remember, always practice kindness, love and courage. These values can guide you through difficult times and will always lead you to victory. And of course, never stop believing in the power of good, because, in the end, good always wins over evil. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video and share it with your friends. This helps us bring you more amazing stories.